Okay, thanks everybody for coming to the second part of the OER showcase with us. So we are entering the Open Education Showcase, which is also called the Lightning Talks. So first up for the Lightning Talks is going to be Jennifer ZERKEE from the SFU Copyright Office, and her presentation is Finding OER, and she'll be speaking about finding using openly licensed Creative Commons material. And I've got a little timer, so if you want, I can give you maybe a wave at the 2-minute mark.
Yep,
How does that sound?
good.
Perfect.
Good.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as John mentioned, I am with the SFU Copyright Office. I also have a certificate from Creative Commons in CC licenses for librarians. And I always have to start my talks by saying that I'm also not a lawyer, so nothing I'm going to tell you today should be taken as legal advice. Okay, so as with any scholarly work, when you're creating OER, there's a good chance you're going to be incorporating figures and diagrams from other sources. You might be using maps or images from other creators. You might be working with existing OER and either adapting or modifying or mixing a couple things together. And you might be embedding multimedia material. So in any of those cases, you are going to implicate copyright in those other pieces you want to include. And to make it easier for you to then openly license your resulting OER and make it easy for others to reuse and remix themselves, you want to think about what licenses that content has that you're putting in there. Okay, see if I can find the right tab here. Okay, so there are a number of sources for finding existing OER. So this is a page from the SFU library that outlines things like BC Campus, of course, the OER Commons, OpenStax, and a number of other resources there. If you are looking for scholarly material, so those diagrams and figures or, excerpts from open publications or journal articles, the directory open access journals can be a good place to start. So you can search on there or browse on there by subject, and you can search at the journal level or the article level. So for those research-based outputs, that can be a good source. For more general types of images or photos, Creative Commons search is a great place. So they have a number of sources that they draw from. So the nice thing about this is that these are pre-vetted by Creative Commons for you. So this is they've got quite a range of museums and galleries and archives from around the world that they draw content from. And then finally, the library also has this other page on finding online images, and it's done by discipline. So the caveat with this one is that they're not all necessarily going to be open or openly licensed, so you do have to kind of be a little bit cautious with those. And I know not everyone here is from SFU, but your library, your teaching and learning center probably has similar resources that they can share with you. And of course, when in doubt, ask your liaison librarian, your teaching and learning librarian, or your copyright office. Okay, so to come back to licenses. So in the majority of cases, OERs, open access publications, and other openly licensed content will have a Creative Commons license attached to it. There are other types of licenses, or a creator or a publisher can just put their own license language or their own terms on how you can reuse their content, but Creative Commons are the most common. There are 6 different Creative Commons licenses, each comprising a different combination of the 4 terms that they use. So those terms are attribution, share alike, non-commercial, and no derivatives. And I will come back to those in a moment. So I've got those 6 down the left there. They also have 2 markings for the public domain. So I've got those on the right. So the top one is because copyright protection has expired, or that work was never protected by copyright in the first place. So with that one, you just want to keep in mind that the term of copyright protection is different in different countries. So exercise a little bit of caution there. And CC0, the second one, is for works released voluntarily into the public domain. So rather than openly licensing something and wanting to make sure they get attribution, a creator might create something and say, I just want to put this out there and let everybody use it, and they don't even have to credit me. So that's what CC0 is. So those 2 aren't really licenses because there's no copyright in those works to license, but they are markings that indicate that the work can be reused in a wide variety of ways. Okay, so I talked about the 4 conditions associated with Creative Commons licenses. So by means attribution, which means that the work must be cited anytime it's reused. SA means share alike, which means that if you modify, adapt, or remix the work, you must apply the same license to your resulting work. NC means non-commercial, which prohibits commercial use of the work. And ND means no derivatives, which means you can't make derivatives or adaptations of the work. So you won't run into that very often in the OER world because, of course, the whole point of OER is to be able to adapt and make changes to things. But if you're looking for content to put in your OER, you do need to be aware that that one is out there. So you can see that those occur in different combinations, making up those 6 different licenses. So because of those conditions, some of the licenses are, of course, more open than others. Public domain and CC0 can be used in any way without even attribution. CC BY is the most open of the actual licenses because it requires only attribution. Right, under a CC BY license, anyone, anywhere can do absolutely anything with that work, and all they have to do is credit the original creator. And then down to the bottom, as I mentioned, the no derivatives licenses are quite restrictive because essentially all you can do is reproduce and share that work. You can't make any changes to it. So it is possible to use works with different licenses in your OER. There's just a couple of things you have to keep in mind. So the license you then apply to your OER as a whole doesn't change those licenses of the content that you've included. So for example, if you noticed on the first slide, I've licensed my slides CC BY NC, or attribution non-commercial. But you can see that this graph, which I did not create, is licensed CC BY. So anyone could take that chart out of my slides and do anything with it under the CC BY license. They wouldn't be restricted to non-commercial use only because I, of course, can't change the terms on content that I didn't create, even though I've included it there. So what that means is when you're putting your OER together, you need to, first of all, make it really clear in there that those individual contents that you've included have different licenses on them and what those licenses are. So I've included it there, and I've actually got a bit more detail in the notes on the slides so that if somebody wanted to find the original and do something else with it, they could do that. And the other thing you want to think about is when you license the OER as a whole, somewhere in your language where you talk about how that's licensed, you want to indicate that there is other content in there that might have a different license on it or might have different circumstances. So this just gives your users a heads up that when they're going through there, they know that not everything is necessarily licensed the same way. The conditions on the CC licenses also mean that there are some licenses that just can't be combined or remixed or adapted. So again, those no derivatives licenses are just very difficult to work with. You get a whole row of X's because you can't remix them. And then the share-alike licenses, because any resulting work needs to be licensed the same way, they're not compatible with absolutely everything either. So that is your very quick lightning introduction to CC licenses, but I am happy to answer any questions. Yeah, does she need the mic, John?
Yeah, okay. Right over.
So if you adapt something that's already been adapted, how do you do the attribution? If there's 5 or 6 different versions, do you have to give attribution to every single one of them?
That's a good question. You would want to, that might be a bit of a case-by-case question, or it might be something that Amanda could maybe chime in on. You would want to, so you definitely want to cite the version that you're using. And then I think you would have to think about what parts of that content you're including and how those kind of layer back to earlier licenses. Yeah, things like that would be a case-by-case. Sorry, yeah, please.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Please do.
Sorry, you're saying if you bring in multiple Creative Commons licenses into one, or
If you bring in something that's already brought in something that's already...
Yeah, if you're the...
should have, that one that's already, the layers and the versioning should be properly attributed anyway back to the original.
Yeah.
So you would attribute, like, if you're borrowing from somebody that's done it properly, then they should have done it. So you're just using what they licensed as CC BY, or CC BY SA.
I was slightly worried because when we teach our students to give proper attribution, if they say this idea comes from X and it didn't actually come from X, it came from Y and X was just quoting it,
Right.
then we'll...
So if they're saying it came from X but it was really Y, then X should have been attributing Y.
Right, but you have to give all of those all the way back in order to be setting a good example for your students of where that exact original bit came from.
That would be ideal. I mean, that'd be ideal, but that's a lot of tracing back. You know, so, yeah.
Yeah, it could be an element of which part of it you're reusing, right? So if you're focusing in on a graph that appeared in something else and that graph is specifically cited as coming from somewhere else, you might want to cite that graph from its original source as it appeared in
As indeed we
the
would tell
next
our students
source.
if they're citing X who's
Yeah.
quoting Y.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask what the kind of possibilities are for using Creative Commons licensing alongside traditional Knowledge Commons licensing, and whether they can be used side by side or not.
And that's a good question. So I'm familiar with traditional knowledge licensing, but not in depth. My thought would be that depending how you're using it, it might be a matter of including that content, and you'd want to cite that external content anyway with its specific license. So again, it would be like something you're including that it doesn't change to the overall license that you put on your OER. It's got its own license, and you just want to make sure that you cite that. I don't know if Amanda, you have anything?
So you can't, you can, as long as you cite the TK license within the CC collection, then you can use both licenses. Or if you create a new, like let's say you created the journal, so that entire journal is CC by NC, and then as Jennifer pointed out in there, you'd say, unless otherwise noted by the TK licenses on pages, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
My name is John Bourne, and I'm from the Teaching and Learning Center, and I'm the manager of Learning Technology and Educational Media. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about creating OERs and the open educational media, and a little bit about what my teams do and some of the work we've done in the past and the future. So, so the teams that I work with at the TLC, we work with faculty and staff to assist with the questions on the why and what and the how of OER at SFU. So we do this through one-on-ones. We do it through workshops, presentations, just like I'm doing right now, resource building and creating OERs with faculty and staff. So there's just a list of some of the crew that I work with. And the crew that I've been working with has been doing this on something called the Open Ed Media blog, and they've been doing it there for about probably 4 years or longer since I've started in the position at the Teaching and Learning Center. So even this presentation that I'm doing today is an adaptation, so it's a remix from one of Jason's Open Educational Resources OER pages. So I'll give you guys the URL, and it's right there. It's http://edmedia.tlc.sfu.ca, and I'll actually click on the link too, and hopefully it doesn't take me somewhere that... So the site that I'm showing you guys now, when I first came to the TLC, this is a site that the Ed Media team had put together. And what it is from their the educational media program. It was called the Educational Media Protege Program at the time. What they were doing is they were working with faculty and staff that were working at the TLC and taking workshops with them, and they were pushing OER. So anything that they were doing and that they were creating with faculty, they were helping them to create media and the educational media with them, and they were putting on the website as OER. And what they were doing is they were teaching them about Creative Commons, they were teaching them the proper ways to do searching, they were teaching them about WordPress, they were teaching them about the tools to help create these educational media resources. So it might have been using Audacity, it might have been using graphic tools, it might have, like Photoshop, it could have been anything that they needed to help build types of things that they wanted to have into their curriculum. So I'll go back to my presentation. So these learning objectives are part of one of the courses or one of the workshops that Jason teaches, and Jason Toll, and these are both inside and outside the EMP. So specifically for a course using OER in one of Jason's classes is about being able to find local SFU resources and people regarding copyright OER opportunities. So it's very important for us to kind of create an ecosystem at the Teaching and Learning Center. So it might be really about all the resources that are out there. It's not just one person or one group or one individual. Like you're seeing today, I think it's all about it's about faculty, it's about students, it's about staff groups like the library and the Teaching and Learning Center. So it doesn't just exist in one particular department in SFU. It really is an ecosystem of a number of groups, and external, like BC Campus and Amanda today. It really is an ecosystem that is internal and external to SFU and outside. It really does take a community and beyond to make these things happen. Being able to identify sources of open educational resources, OER suited to your curriculum. So it's not just a matter of finding a proper image or finding a video, but it's being able to take those types of materials and being able to customize those materials specifically for your course. And a lot of instructors, they find some materials, but they might not know specifically how they can adapt those materials to their courses. So if they have a chance to work with us at the TLC and some of the people at my team, they might be able to best find ways how they can use them as assessments or particular types of way that they can use them for any other things that might augment anything in their curriculum that might just be a particular type of lesson. And like I mentioned before, assessments, it could be any type of assignment. It might not just be something that is kind of an activity that these students might absorb, or something that's just kind of something that is used inside of Canvas as external or auxiliary material. I remember one of the courses I taught at the University of New Brunswick, OERs always seemed like external material that wasn't part of the course. It always seems like it was an external materials. Like if I was teaching about audio recording, it was never something that seemed to be integrated in the course. It was like, if you want to learn more about this subject matter, go on to, at the time, I think it was WebCT CE6, and learn a little bit more. But it wasn't something that I learned to integrate into my course. But I think at the Teaching and Learning Center, we've started to do and learn a lot more about open pedagogies, which is something that I'm really interested in, and so is the team. And then again, being familiar with Creative Commons licensing and how to use it. That's something that we're constantly learning a little bit more about, and it's something that my team is working on, and with Jennifer, she's got that. She had it down, I think, with her last presentation. And being here today gives me an opportunity to further advertise the new flexible educational media program. So Dwayne Woods, who's in the back, Jason, who's right here, Gabe, who's not here right now, but they're working with the team right now. So if faculty and staff, anybody in this room that want to learn a little bit more about working with OERs, creating, adapting, remixing them, they can reach out to myself or one of the members on the team and learn about how to do it so that it's customized for your courses. So it's not just a workshop that you see advertised online that's 3 hours. And they've been starting to do that right now with faculty at SFU. The learning technology team also has been a huge part of the work that we've been doing with OER. Like you heard with Joan, Xing Lu has been really, she's been working very closely with Joan Sharp, who talked a little bit today about the work that she's been doing with the dialectical mapping too. So that's, both teams have been instrumental in it. And the very last slide, SFU, Hope might talk a little bit about the grants, but we've been offering OER grants for up to $5,000 for faculty members here at SFU that want to use open educational resources to replace kind of critical components within their course that would have students buy maybe an open textbook or some type of materials within their course that's cost savings to students. So if a faculty member is a recipient of that grant, Hope or myself or somebody that's on the OER grant team sits down with them and we let them know that we're there to support them. But even if somebody doesn't receive a grant, we let them know that we can do in-kind services with them. So with that said, grant or no grant, We've been able to, at the Teaching and Learning Center and of course the library, have been able to kind of do in-kind services. And if the grants were to ever disappear, Hope and myself, we've always been thinking of ways that we can tour SFU and do kind of in-kind services without the grants, which would be a huge challenge, but I think we're up for the challenge as well. So if anything that I talked about today interested you, you could start as a first contact. You could just reach out to me at jborn@sfu.ca, and I can definitely hook you up with some of the right people at the Teaching and Learning Center. Next up, I would like to introduce Kate Shuttleworth from the SFU Library, and her presentation is Publishing OER. She's going to be speaking about publishing with OJS and OMP.
Okay, so hi everyone. So as John mentioned, I'm Kate Shuttleworth. I'm a digital scholarship librarian here at SFU Library. It's been really great today to have the chance to hear about some examples of open education activities happening in the class. And so I wanted to just take the opportunity to show you a tool that we use at Simon Fraser University and the other institutions are using as well, developed by the Public Knowledge Project that some of you may have heard of. So I'm going to be talking about actually two different systems, Open Journal Systems, or OJS, and Open Monograph Press, OMP. And so I'll give you a bit of background here. So the Public Knowledge Project is a research and software development project based at SFU Library, and they develop both of these tools. And these are open source management systems for peer-reviewed journal and book publications. So what we're referring to here is the ability to put work all the way through the workflow of scholarly publishing, so uploading a submission, conducting peer review, doing the copy editing, and the final production and dissemination of the work. So we heard from Ella and Naya a little bit earlier about the course journal that they were working on developing using open journal systems. And Juan Pablo also used this in his Making Knowledge Public course as one of the ways of disseminating student work. So those are two really great models of how this tool can be used in the class. So Open Monograph Press, I will show you kind of what the finished product looks like when it's published, but I'm going to take you on a bit of a dive into the back end of OJS. OMP and OJS look quite similar on the sort of administrative end, so that's why I'll just take you on a tour of one, but just know that they're both quite similar on that side of things. So to give you a sense of what first of all, the finished product looked like, so we saw a screenshot earlier of the course journal from Ella's class. This is another example of a course journal that was created a few years ago, and I'll actually take you to the site so you can get a better sense of what that looks like. So this was for an English literature class, so you can see here the most recent issue of the journal, which was produced for a single semester of the course, and then these are examples of the students' work that they produced as part of their coursework. So each one is available as an HTML file as well as PDF here on the site. And as Ella mentioned, they also made MP3 files for all of their submissions in their journal. And then to give you an example of OMP, so this is the collection of monographs published at SFU Library using Open Monograph Press. And I can just quickly take you into one to show you what that looks like. So very straightforward, you have the title, author, synopsis, the copyright information over here, and then each chapter is available as a PDF, and you also have a complete PDF for the whole book available here. So this is what the finished product looks like after it's gone through this workflow of peer review and copy editing. So I'll take you inside what it looks like when you're logged in. And actually, the first thing I'm going to do is go here. So this is a test site. This is not a real journal, so we're not looking at real submissions here. So just so you know, we're not infringing on anyone's privacy or anything like that. This has been set up for this kind of demonstration. So if you were using this in a class, first of all, the students would register with the journal. Oh, it looks like it logged me out. I'll just quickly get back in there. So students register as authors in the journal, and then they can go to submissions, and this is part of the website that gets set up as part of the course, make a new submission, and then it takes them through the process of submitting their work. So they'll check off the submission requirements, and the instructor can customize what these are, and then they'll upload their submission, enter some metadata describing the work that they've done, and then on it goes into OJS where the instructor can receive it. So as the instructor, you then have access to all these tools down the side. So you would go to submissions and see all of the submissions from the students would look like this one with the little submission symbol here. these other ones are at different stages of the publishing process in this example, but all of the student submissions would look like this. So you could go in, see what the student has submitted, and then send it off to peer review. So here you could select another student in the class to conduct the peer review for their peer. And then the student would receive a notification saying we've been asked to review someone's work. I could show you what that looked like for the student, but I have to log out and in again as a reviewer. So instead I've just done a little screenshot here of what the student would see. So they get, they can log into OJS. You'll notice that they only see one, just the submission option on the side here, so they don't get the full access to the administrative side of the journal. So they can download and review the work. They can type their review right in the field here, or they can upload a revised PDF or a revised Word document if they're using track changes, things like that. So that then gets sent back to the instructor. It doesn't go straight back to the author. So the instructor can then check the peer review that the student's done. They can supplement it with their own feedback. They could grade the student on the peer review if they wanted to. So from there, where are we here? So from there, the instructor can take the work through to copy editing. So they might do the copy editing for the work themselves just to make sure everything is looking good before it's sent through to production. Then they can create a final PDF or HTML or whatever type of file they'd like, upload it to the journal, create an issue, especially for that semester and that course, and then finally at the end of term, publish all the students' work openly on the site. So a few other things I'll just show you while we're in the back end here of OJS would be the settings. So in a course that is actually having the students kind of work at setting up the journal and critically examine some of the publishing process and make decisions on what their journal, how their journal will function, they'd be working here in the journal settings, filling in some of this information here, things like about the journal, some of the policies. So they'd be in website settings as well, working on the look and feel of the site. They can upload logos, change the theme so it would look prettier. And they would be in the workflow settings. That's where they would do something like a review policy, so all their peer reviewers knew what was expected of them, selecting what kind of peer review they're conducting. And then finally over in distribution, they'd be maybe looking at the permissions. Here's where they would decide about who was retaining the copyright to the work, and then things like a Creative Commons license they could select for the journal and have all that information here. So you can see the functionality in OJS really takes you through all the different components of setting up and managing the journal and running the peer review and things like that. So we've done this in a few different classes now at SFU, using kind of the two different models of students submitting their work or students actually managing and setting up and running the journal. And we've talked about some of this at length today already, so I won't go into this in too much detail. But just to give you a sense of how this fits in with open pedagogy and why this is an interesting example of doing that work, it's really giving the students the choice of what they're working on, what they plan to share. So they can write a paper on the topic of their choice, but they could also be working on some artwork or a podcast or something more creative that they can contribute to the journal. So it's students creating, making something that they're sharing, rather than just being, as we talked about earlier, consumers, but actually being creators of knowledge. They're learning by doing, they're learning out loud, they're talking to one another, rather than just learning about something like open access in a lecture format. They're learning about it by actually participating and creating an open access journal. They're using real-world applications, so a tool like OJS, and just being involved in the actual publishing process of a real-life journal. They're in dialogue with one another. So again, they're learning by examining the process of publishing, working on it in a hands-on way rather than through lectures. They're learning from one another, for example, by doing peer review for one another and getting that feedback and learning how to work with the feedback they've received. And they're using open resources, creating an open journal, but also using open source software like OJS or OMP. They're also learning about the value of open. So again, they're learning about open access, what it means to have work behind paywalls. Some students, as we heard, might not really be familiar with paywalls and what that means because as a member of an institution, they've always had that access. But they're really starting to examine those power structures and see that firsthand. So I'm running out of time, so I won't go into this in too much detail. But students are learning about scholarly publishing. They're getting to explore peer review by doing it. They're developing their writing skills if they're doing written assignments to publish through the journal, as well as their reviewing skills and learning how to give that constructive feedback. They're learning about things like copyright, fair use, whether the author's retaining copyright or if the journal has the copyright to the final work. They learn about Creative Commons licenses, open access, and all these other things. There's always challenges involved with this type of work, including the time to develop the course, the syllabus around this major project, student resistance to this type of assignment that's different to a typical lecture and the type of course that they're used to attending. This works best in, I would say, upper-level undergraduate classes where students have had some practice honing their writing skills before they're asked to make their work open, and also in courses where there's one major final project that they're submitting at the end of course, so that you're working on it throughout the term and honing it and improving it. Setting expectations for students so they understand how this course is different. And then just some of the challenges around representing student work, making sure they're submitting something that they can be comfortable having available openly going forward and that they can be proud of since it'll have their name attached to it going forward. Okay, any questions?
Questions for Kate? Yeah.
Yeah, I had a quick question. We were actually discussing OJS at the CNIE conference, which is out at UBC last week. And there was a lot of interest from faculty in the room about using this. And I'm wondering if you have, I was just looking on the site, there's a hosting solutions. So at SFU would not be setting up accounts for faculty from other institutions, for instance.
Right, so it's a good question. So many institutions are able to host the software themselves because it is open source.
Yeah.
So if they have a systems department, an IT group that has the capacity to do that, so I know that UBC is already hosting OJS themselves, for example.
Okay.
Smaller institutions may not have the ability or the capacity to do that through IT. So they have the option to pay PKP, the Public Knowledge Project, to host it on their behalf. So there's an annual fee.
And then they have their own instance.
That's right.
I will pass on that information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions?
More questions for Kate? Yeah. We'll continue to use this just because it goes on the...
On the record.
I know, just because...
Sorry.
Is it kept on the server here, and how long?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yes, I believe is the short answer. That I'm looking over at my colleague Ali, who's worked in this area as well. But yes, so the work is stored on SFU servers because we're hosting our own instance. As far as I know, to date, everything has been preserved that we've done so far. I think there is a conversation happening about that long-term preservation. If a journal is created for one particular course and then isn't continued in any way, for example, if it's not picked up as a student journal run outside of courses, or if the instructor doesn't want to continue it, then there is a question about whether that work would be archived and preserved in a different way, for example, in a repository rather than through OJS. But because we're hosting it ourselves at this point, we're able to just keep the work indefinitely. So the students will always have that record of what they produced. Yeah. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Esteban Morales from the SFU Education and School of Communication Lab. He's going to be doing a presentation. Is that proper? Are you from the right area?
Yeah.
Collaborating with OER to speak about using hypothesis for teaching and collaboration.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to do my best to be as fast as everybody has. So I am Esteban. I am a master's student in Educational Technology and Learning Design program, almost doing my thesis. And I'm a research assistant in the Scholcom lab, led by Professor Juan Pablo Alperin. He already kind of touched on what I'm going to present. We were discussing how much he got to talk about my topic and how much I was going to. I kind of want the discussion because I will be sharing with you some of our work with it. So the first thing is that what is social annotation? What do we mean by social annotation? Is that when we annotate, it's kind of fighting the text. It's kind of being able to open a space to dialogue with a written text. And that was very set in traditional texts. We usually write with highlighters in the border of the text. And right now we haven't been able to find a good technology that kind of replicated that process online. So we're kind of working on that. And the framework that's around that is called social annotation. What is social annotation? It's characterized by 3 features. First is that users can't annotate or comment text. Second is that users are able to highlight the text. And third is that it has an online platform for collaboration. I will show you how that looks in a moment. So the tool we have been using for that is Hypothesis for 2 main reasons. First is open source, so you can go and work with it. You can provide feedback. You can do all the things you can usually do with open source software. And the second part is that their mission is really advocated towards open dialogue and open mission. And forward, they go beyond education because I feel they have missions in different topics, but they have advocated towards open education a lot. So if you want to implement Hypothesis, you just go to the website. It's very simple. You create an account. It takes about a minute, not longer than that. And then you have 2 options. If you use Google Chrome, you can just install an extension in the browser. If not, you can click here in the bookmarklet, yeah, that's the word, and it will create an URL that you can attach to every text online. And then you just go to whatever you want to annotate, click on that extension or bookmarklet, and start annotating the web. So how does that look? This is an example for one of Juan Pablo's classes. So we have this text from the New Yorker. We have this link right here that says Launch Hypothesis. This is on Firefox, so it's not the extension. And when we click on it, it will turn something like this. The text will become alive for you and the students. So you'll see some annotations here. I put little squares on the users so we don't violate their privacy, of course. But then they'll be able to annotate whatever they see. We usually have 4 types of annotations. First is just highlighting. You can highlight pieces that you think are important. You can also comment on the specific parts of the text. So you highlight something and add a note to it. You can also annotate the text overall, kind of like general comment on the text, or you can reply to other people's annotations. So there are 4 types of text. As you see, there is a lot of conversation around. You can talk about the title, you can talk about the author, you can talk about the sources, about the images. This is why you can look in detail. There are 3 types of roles you can have, or types of annotations. They can be public, meaning everybody who have a Hypothesis link can see the annotations. You can create groups, so only the people inside those groups can see the annotations. Or you can just create private annotations for yourself. If you're kind of doing your lit review process, you can start doing annotations and retrieve them for yourself. You can include images. For example, in this case, they were talking about the Rod Stewart cover. And Juan added a cover so that he can illustrate what they were trying to say in this cover. So there's some ways that you can integrate annotations inside the classroom. I'm just going to be talking about 5 examples. There is a lot of different ways. And you can mix a lot of these options. The first one is annotations as prompts. So what you do is that the instructor first goes through the text and kind of annotates pieces of it, kind of bringing props about specific parts of the text that they want to bring the attention to the students. So have you seen this? This can link to this concept in the class or open a discussion around that. The second is, this is very popular, it's when you're trying to build vocabulary in students, when you're trying to make them conscious about the words that are being used, you make them define certain words inside the text. So they start building a dictionary around the topics. The third one is just questions. Start asking questions to the text. Start thinking critically about what you're reading. And then you can have a second instance, third instance, when the students are going to come back to the text and start replying to these annotations, or maybe just posing more questions. The fourth one is ask opinions. Just get a position towards the text and say what you think in the text around the topic, or as an annotated bibliography. This is usually mixed. I haven't seen somebody that just do one of these. They usually propose a question and responses thing or voice the students' kind of view of the tool. But there's some ways that you can start thinking about it. And previous literature, as I said, annotation is not new in education. It has been going for a long time. The new thing is just this digital component to it. But annotation has been found to have several advantages in education. The first one is that it has been shown to prove learning gains, meaning students learn more because they're reading slowly, because they have to annotate. They have to interact with the text. They can't do a shallow reading. They have to do it deeply. The second one is that it promotes critical thinking, metacognitive skills, meaning they think more about the way they're thinking when they're reading, and they comprehend more of the readings. And finally, they're motivated, and they have more positive emotions around the topic. Overall, students like it. Students like to annotate because they feel they're getting a voice about what they're reading. So what we're doing in the Scholarcom Lab, as Juan Pablo said, last term, 6 groups in SFU were implementing hypotheses, and what we did was collect all the annotations of all the courses. Then we surveyed the students, all the students in the 6 courses, and we interviewed the instructors to try to see how did it look in different settings. They were free to implement the tool whatever they feel it was more useful. And then we got some feedback. I'm going to present to you some very small results we have seen so far. That a collection just ended. But we are starting to see some patterns about how useful this could be. The first thing is that, as you can see, they consider it was useful. There is a skewness of this graph towards the agree and the total agree. Still, it's a technology, it's a style some people are not going to like at all, but people feel this was useful for them to learn. As well, they feel this helped them to share their knowledge and experience with other people. Especially people who are shy in classes felt this tool was very useful to share because they feel they were protected on their screen. So they were more confident about sharing knowledge. Also, they help it as well, the other side of that coin. People who were shy, who were not talking in classes, were talking in this platform. So they were sharing their points of views, and people were acknowledging them. People were motivated to annotate, of course, because sometimes people give grades to it, so that made people annotate, but also because they feel it was important for their personal learning, because it was a way to have a conversation, and less ways to understand other perspectives of some aspect. They are confused about some pieces of the text or things like that. I'm going to go really fast to that. When we collected all the annotations, we were trying to see what were they writing, what was their intention when they were writing. So when they're supporting other students' knowledge, whether they're asking questions about the text, were they interpreting what they were reading, where they're elaborating, meaning moving the conversation forward, providing examples, linking to other resources, where they're trying to reach a consensus with other students, where they're in conflict with the content or with another peers, or were they just clarifying what they were reading. We see the most common use is interpretation. They try to annotate how they interpret what they're reading. But what's interesting here is that it also varies according to the instructor prompts or guides about how you're going to annotate or what you're going to annotate. So for example, in one course, it was pretty obvious that they were interpreting a lot, almost 60%. But in consensus building, nobody was trying to reach consensus in the annotations. And for the students that thought annotations were valuable, what made it so? So the most common answer was that it made them think differently, because they were engaging with other ideas. It also confirmed their ideas. When it was a consensus, everybody was thinking the same, they'll feel validated and they feel like their voice was being listened to. This can be good, this can be bad. There's no easy way. And they understand more about the readings, the concepts, and the terms, and they realize that their own comments were being helpful. They were acknowledged, and they feel like their self-esteem about their knowledge, about what they shared, was good. These were some pretty short summary of what we have found so far. I hope that's useful. I hope you will use the tool. It's really good. And it's been used to what Professor Juan Pablo was talking about, engage in public conversation. This doesn't have to happen inside a classroom, and only inside a classroom. You can engage them with conversation with the overall public. So thank you so much. If you have any question, okay.
Thank you, Esteban. Any questions? Yeah. Pass that over. It just gets on our podcast recording there.
Hi. I'm sorry if this was mentioned earlier. Juan Pablo mentioned it. I was not here. Is this okay for a large class, and how does simultaneous comments work? Will the comment of one student override another person's comment?
Again, it really depends on how you design. The tool is really open that will fit your instructional design of how you'll use it. Our experience last term was with a course that was around 100 students. And what they did was they created subgroups of readings. So they kind of built, inside themselves, they divided in 4, and their discussions were around those smaller groups. Because if not, it was too hard for them. That was the instructor decision. I have seen people just kind of opening the article and saying everybody can comment on the same thing and kind of making it public. But it's going to be harder to assess, which is the concern of the instructor in this case. Because they were going to be assessing 100 people commenting a single article and trying to see how much they were commenting, the quality of the comments. It was really hard to keep up. But yes, I've seen people doing it, and I think it could work, but it requires a lot of work on the planning before implementing the tool.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm using Hypothesis for the class I'm taking right now, and I was wondering, can you use it on mobile devices, or does it have to be on a web browser?
You can right now, but it's not very friendly yet, as far as I have seen. It's an open source tool, so I've seen there's a lot of movement going around. I think for tablets works really well. For phones, not yet for the space.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Is it only for online text content, or can you also use it for, I think you mentioned images, and also films, and also PDFs?
Yes, you can annotate everything that's online in one sense, images, movies, everything. If you open Twitter, there's annotating Twitter, which is not very practical, but people do it. And you can annotate, for example, a lot of people last term were doing the shared the PDFs in Dropbox or Google Drive or the SFU Bolts account, and they kind of shared that link with Hypothesis so people could annotate it. So there is a way, you can do it, but maybe the idea is to keep the conversation open, so on the other side, maybe it's better not to. I don't know. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next up, we have Hope Power and from the library, and her presentation is Getting Support with OER.
Coming at you in just one moment here.
And her presentation is about finding funding and in-kind support for projects at SFU via the OER Grants Program, the OER Working Group, and beyond.
Okay, and just while this is loading and I'm finding my place here, as we're getting towards the end of the day here, we've heard a number of speakers talking about using open educational resources and practices in the classroom. And before I launch into talking about getting support with OER, I just wanted to highlight a few of the whys of open educational resources in the classroom that I think we've heard about today. So certainly open educational resources are free for students, so saving students some money while supporting their academic success. Using open educational resources, access to these resources isn't a financial barrier. Generally, the resources will be available online as well. For instructors, because open educational resources are generally published with permission to adapt and customize the content, there's advantages for using flexible learning materials that can be customized to support your instructional needs, your curriculum, your specific learning goals for your students. And here at SFU, I was pleased to see that there was a mention in the 2019, the newly released academic plan, identifying open access to course materials as being a key strategy in terms of the distribution and mobilization of knowledge as being a goal that's in line with academic planning here at SFU. So again, kind of that public knowledge piece, that opportunity and perhaps even obligation to kind of share knowledge publicly. Just quickly, student perspectives on OER. I'm going to share a quote from Parham Elmi, who was a former member of the Student Society here at SFU and had helped initially form our working group for OER. In his words, adoption of OER in the classroom can have a huge impact on thousands of students' academic careers. It could be the reason that someone doesn't have to work a second or even first job to go through school, allowing them more time to learn the material in their field, maybe even get a scholarship instead. It could give them that much more peace of mind to students who would have otherwise worried about where they would get the money to pay for the multitude of expenses such as tuition, groceries, and rent. He says adoption of OERs will save students money, decrease stress, and keep information accessible for everyone. So some pretty compelling reasons that I think Parham's identified there. And to share a faculty perspective on OER, this is a quote from Petra Menz from the Department of Mathematics, who's also one of our OER grant recipients. And in her words, we designed open source material for the social science strand of differential and integral calculus by adopting an open source textbook and adapting it for our needs. Students are appreciative of free material, but moreover, the cohesiveness and interconnectivity among the various course materials provides for a smoother learning journey through our courses. An adaptation such as ours is a huge undertaking, and so support from various sources, such as the library, the Copyright Office, and the Teaching and Learning Center, that helped navigating information in the law was of essence to let the mathematics shine, so to speak. This adaptation was made possible through an SFU Open Educational Resources grant. So I don't want to gloss over that note that this can be a huge undertaking and that support can be really necessary to make this happen in the classroom. I know that this is a short talk, but I thought I'd just take a minute here and just put out a question for discussion. If you just want to turn maybe to the person sitting next to you and just take a minute just to share what opportunities and challenges do you see for using OER in your own practice. And then I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, so there's not a lot of time to get into this too deeply, but do you know, is the use of OER supported by your institution or in your context? What additional supports might be needed? So we'll just turn to the person next to you, take, let's say, 2 to 3 minutes here, and just have a quick chat about this. I hate to cut what sounds like a pretty lively discussion short here. That was great to hear. The volume in the room just suddenly went up. John's given me permission to take a couple more minutes and just see if anybody wanted to kind of share something that you just chatted about. So either opportunities and challenges you see for using OER or supports that you know are available in your context. Does anybody want to share a little bit about what you just chatted about?
No, microphone's such a burden, sorry. We've actually got 2 microphones. I'm going to put another one in.
Great.
So one challenge we talked about was, so although I like to have all my materials available for free in my classes, it can take money away from like indie presses, indie book publishers, especially, and also sometimes marginalized authors who, otherwise could benefit from having that additional money from a whole classroom buying their book.
Right, yeah. No, I think that's really an interesting kind of, something to highlight there to think about, yeah. And then I think.
So the challenges that we talked about were about, first of all, accreditation. So I think it's the broader thing of how open source material is being widely accepted. So one of the things is transferring a course from one institution to the other, or an institution's course is being accepted at other institutions as well, is if you just put a bunch of articles that are open source or use a textbook that's open source, is it going to be recognized by the other institutions in the same way, and the course will be equivalent to another course that uses a publisher's paid textbook? So I think that idea of being broadly accepted, these resources, and also for accreditation purposes.
Right, yeah. No, that's a really good point, yeah.
I think
think following up on her comment, what we need is an accreditation system for the open education resource. So wherever you go within country or province, if you have learned a course from that textbook, then there must be an authority which gives you that credential. So it doesn't. So if you make it institution specific, then you create gradations, hierarchies, suspicion, all that kind of stuff, which I think is the problem, which doesn't let you leverage the potential of the resource.
Right, okay. Great, really interesting challenges being identified here in questions, yeah. And what about, in terms of supports in your context, did anybody identify supports that might be available either at your institution or other contexts? All right, well, I'm just going to quickly highlight a few supports that are available at SFU, and then I think that's going to segue nicely into Amanda for BC Campus is going to talk a little bit about the broader picture for support for open ed across BC as well. Here at SFU, for instructors who are interested in adapting or adopting OER for use in their classroom, we do have the grants program that John had mentioned earlier. In fact, our next deadline is a few days from now, May 30th. So there's still time to get in an application. With this program, we do provide funding of up to $5,000, as well as in-kind support from the Library and Teaching and Learning Center with finding and adapting OER for use in the classroom. Just a quick snapshot of year 3 for our program, which is just this past year. We estimate that with an investment of about $44,000 in the program, we were able to fund open resources being used in over 15 classes, which would impact about 2,000 students. And with an average textbook cost of $100, we're estimating student savings after 1 year being $203,000 just for this past year. That being said, beyond the grants program, as John mentioned, at SFU, we're also looking at sort of beyond the grants program, what other supports are needed? How do we start to build kind of a community of practice around open education? How do we work together to, like today's event, how do we bring people together to highlight the good work that's being done on campus, to come together as a forum to raise some of the questions that have just come up even in the last few minutes in our discussion and address those together so that we can move forward? So on campus, whether you're here at SFU or other campuses, you can look to your library, your teaching and learning center. If there is an open working group on your campus or grants program, you can look for supports there. And if you're not sure what might be available at your institution, then BC Campus is fantastic. We're so lucky to have BC Campus here as a support in our province. And I think I will turn it over to Amanda maybe to talk a little bit about BC Campus and what's next for open ed here.
So first, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're on the Musqueam territory of the Coast Salish peoples and really grateful to be here today. Just gonna okay, there we go. And grateful to be able to be here today with all of you and really impressed with all of the work that's been happening across Simon Fraser University and the diversity of the work. My name is Amanda Coolidge. I'm the Associate Director for Open Education at BC Campus. And I am going to use some notes here because I do have some things I'd like to read off for you as we go through. So the first thing I want to do is actually to walk you through some of the numbers that represent education in Canada. So the Canadian federal government is using interest fees on student loans as a source of revenue that's projected to earn approximately $862 million in revenue. Canadian students collectively owe over $28 billion in student loans to all levels of government. And in British Columbia, the average student loan debt averages at $28,000. What we also know is that when debt reaches $10,000, the student completion rates actually drop from 59% to 8%. And it turns out that students in Vancouver are one of the largest demographics to use the food banks. Audre Lorde, who's a queer Black poet, says that there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not lead single issue lives. And I often use this quote because I like to think that student loan debt is not actually a result of tuition fees alone. It also includes books and fees and room and board and other living expenses, especially here in Vancouver. And when we talk about access and affordability in post-secondary education, we're talking about the direct effect it has on student success, whether you define student success as student completion, improved learning outcomes, or retention.
And I really believe that the purpose of our work as educators and policy makers and system conveners is to improve access to education, to make education more affordable to the masses and not just the privileged few, and to ensure our students are successful. What we know from research in British Columbia is that 54% of students in a course using that looked at post-secondary students in British Columbia as a whole, 54% of students did not buy a textbook, 27% took fewer classes, 26% in fact never even registered for the course when they saw that there was no open textbook option, and 17% actually dropped or withdrew from the course. And at BC Campus, we've also been looking at what are other issues accompanying the textbook issues, and what we found is that on average, students will pay $92 per course on an access code. And what we mean by an access code is the access to homework systems that may be accompanied with a textbook. And in fact, some of these access codes are sometimes employed alongside with an open textbook. So a faculty member may choose to use an open textbook and not realize that the students may not have switched over to an open source homework system, and instead the students still have to buy an access code to access things like multiple choice questions or case studies. And what's happened in the States too is that these are similar findings showing that students are paying on average about $100. And so what we say often is that that these access codes actually prevent access for students. We've seen that at 4 BC post-secondary institutions, there will be a combined spending of $3.7 million this fall on access codes to online publisher resources. And in the majority of the cases, we know that students lose access to the material at the end of the semester. They may or may not have access for the lifetime of the textbook edition, but that access can't be shared, it can't be sold, and commonly the homework system can only be used for that first course. So what we also know is that the rising cost of post-secondary education is actually not improving student success. So this is where we come to OER, which we've been talking a lot about today, so I won't go into a lot of detail. But the reason behind a lot of this work is the work that we've been doing at BC Campus for the last 15 years. So BC Campus has been around since 2003. We work with the 25 public post-secondary institutions in the areas of educational technology, teaching and learning, and open education. And in 2012, that was really when the boom of open textbooks came to the forefront, when the minister at the time, John Yap, announced that the BC government would give the province $1 million in the creation of the top 40 open textbooks in the top 40 subject areas. And they tasked BC Campus with managing that. And then a year later, we received another $1 million to work on the top 20 trades and technical books. So that was $2 million. Then we received money from the Hewlett Foundation, which is a large philanthropic organization in the United States, to start doing the work of the ZERKEEs, or the zero textbook cost degrees. And then we last year received $250,000 from the government to create a zero cost adult basic education program. And the advocacy behind that work was basically because, as you may or may not know, the adult basic education degree tends to be a little bit of a yo-yo here in British Columbia, in the sense that sometimes it's tuition free and then sometimes the government decides it's not tuition free. And so this time when they said it was going to be tuition free, BC Campus, we jumped over to the ministry and said, that's great. However, the majority of the students who will be involved in the ABE program won't actually be able to afford the course materials. And we know that the faculty themselves are struggling with having to do printouts, or having to borrow books, or having to pay themselves for the work that they've been doing with students. And so at BC Campus, we really consider ourselves system conveners, collaborators, and we like to think of ourselves as innovators. And that's really, we are, as I like to think of it, we're the middle person between the government and the institutions. And so our work is to go to the ministry and to say, this is what's needed in the post-secondary system, this is why, and we'd love some funding for this work to be done. So since 2012, BC as a province has saved students over $10 million in textbook costs, impacted more than 100,000 students, and currently in the collection you'll find over 270 books and guides that you can either adopt, you can adapt, or you can take a look at some of the guides in case you're interested in creating or changing. So that was all lead up to the big topic. So back in a couple of weeks, no, almost a month ago at the Cascadia Open Education Summit, Minister Melanie Mark announced that the province would receive $3.26 million for open education. And that work was quite a long time coming. It was a result mainly of the students' work. The students went, it's a great story actually. About a year and a half ago, I met with the BC Federation of Students, and they sat down and they said, yeah, we're all into open textbooks. How much do you want? And I was like, what? How much do I want? And they're like, and I was like, I don't know, $1 million? And they're like, no, we can do more than that. And so I said, well, I don't know, $2 million? And they're like, no, we're gonna ask for 5. And so, and I was like, great, I could use, that's perfect. So the students are incredible advocates, and what came down to exactly what Russell was talking about is they were relentless in their advocacy, and they continued to push forward, and they continued to meet with everybody in Victoria about what it meant and what the impact would be. When they met with the group that ended up meeting with Premier John Horgan, when he was going through their list of asks, he stopped directly at open education and he pointed at that and said, that's what I want. That's what we want to do. So there is a real commitment here in the province to continue with this work. And so the $3 million, one of the things we did in order to put this ask together is to really identify, well, what's the next step for British Columbia? We know about open textbooks, but there are some courses here where open textbooks don't make a huge difference for some courses. Or what's the impact we can have that can really start expanding and making a difference? And so the $3 million is going to go towards a few things. The first, we are going to create a few open source homework systems. So one of the things, back to Audrey Lor's quote, which is, this is not a single issue, is that we know that there also is not one single homework system that is going to solve all of the subject areas. So what we're looking at is what are ones that are already employed within math and engineering, which ones are already in use across the arts and humanities, which ones are in use in philosophy. And then to basically the ones that we can either adopt, we'll look at adopting and making changes to, or perhaps we'll have to create. And so right now we're in that sort of analysis phase. We're going to be doing some outreach and really understanding what is it that faculty like about about homework systems, and how can we improve upon those and make them usable. Because the fact is we're not interested in taking them away, especially for faculty who use them within very large first-year courses. We understand the importance of it, but what we're interested in doing is reducing that cost and improving the access for students. The second thing we're working on is a number of zero textbook cost programs. So we're going to be looking at in the next couple of years our early childhood education zero textbook cost program, and the reason behind that is because of the latest announcement from the government about the $10 a day daycare, which is going to heavily impact the workforce coming in and what we can do to alleviate those students. Second one will be health. So we're not sure exactly where in health. We need to do quite a big environmental scan to identify where can we make the most impact and where are people interested in really doing the work. Third is business. The fourth is STEM related courses. So once again, we're looking at a number of different STEM courses, and again, we'll be doing environmental scans. Lastly is the trades. And so we have a job posting out right now for a trades open educational representative for the province. The purpose behind that is basically because the trades have become extremely interested in what it looks like to have a zero cost textbook, what it looks like to have a program that doesn't impact their students so heavily in the access area. And so our trades representative will be also doing environmental scans and figuring out where we can work with trades instructors to make a difference. Another area that's going to be happening more towards the winter is we're going to be creating a regional representative program, and that will be someone based in the interior and someone based in the north. And the reason for that is because on the mainland, we have a number of institutions such as yourself that are incredibly well equipped and really have really moved forward with open education. In the areas of the interior and northern British Columbia, we have smaller schools that are having significant barriers to some of the work that they're doing. And what we would like to have is someone who's sort of stationed in those two areas to be able to work collaboratively with those groups of institutions to be able to help lift them up and figure out ways that we can work better together. And then lastly, we're going to continue our research. We've been doing a lot of research right now. We have a lead researcher on our team, Dr. Tanis Morgan, who's been working around the province to really identify what the barriers are, what are the challenges, what can we do more of, what do teaching and learning centers need, why are instructional designers as involved, and how can we continue the momentum. So she'll be taking on some research that is going to directly impact administrators, and that research is what is the return on investment for an institution to take on open? Because what we know is that for administration, the key is, well, what's the cost savings and what's the financials and what's the end game? And I think that will have a lot of impact in terms of what our sustainability plan is at any institution. Because once we know the return on impact on investment, then it's possible that open can be sustainable at an institution by creating more of a diversity of funding across an institution. Okay, that was really fast. Okay, so you're welcome to ask me questions, and you're also welcome to send me an email. We'd love to hear from all of you about kind of what you're thinking and what you'd like to do.
Super. Thanks so much, Amanda. We've got time for 2 or 3 questions, if anybody has any.
It's totally
I see an email address on
Yeah,
there.
it's totally okay. Yeah. I do have to say I was writing to colleagues earlier just saying how incredible I find today has been. Yeah. I think, and I know this sounds corny, but I think you all should be incredibly proud of the work that's happening here because the diversity of the work is incredible. Just to see open journals and the work that you've done in Creative Commons and the hypothesis and what Juan Pablo was talking about today, it's quite exceptional. And so, I think maybe more of those stories need to be shared because it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Super, thank you, Amanda. I know that if there's no questions, that Hope has a few words of wrapping up. We're right on time. We're closing at 3, so thank you so much, Amanda.
Yeah.
Let's give